Hi, I'm Mimi Chan. Welcome to Culture Chat. Thanks for joining the conversation. Hi, everyone. It's the Mimi and Greg Show. It's been another rough week, and I am grateful to Greg Rucka for continuing this podcast journey with me. We have conducted 20 interviews since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. In this episode, Greg discusses a very personal subject, the arrest of his son Elliott in New York City at a Black Lives Matter protest. The New York Post and online blogs have written inaccurate articles that have caused death threats and stress for Greg and his family. I am outraged. California and Oregon is on fire. Our democracy is under attack by our president. There are so many issues in the world: climate change, homelessness, inequality, need I go on? Yet journalists prefer to focus on attacking people who do not deserve it. The inaccuracies on many of these internet articles are proven when I did a search and found one showing a photo of Greg and I from a podcast episode, citing us as the proud parents. That's news to me because I don't have any children. And I am also not married to Greg Rucka. That is the sad state of journalism today. The good ones are fighting to be heard, and the bad ones are flooding the internet. I hope everyone listens to this episode with an open mind to Greg's response to the article and shares his thoughts on the state of media today. Our next book club choice is Greg's very own Atticus Kodiak novels. We are reading Critical Space, Patriot Acts, and The Walking Dead, and would love some listener questions for our future episode. Please submit them before October 1st. For those that don't already know, Greg Rucka is a New York Times best-selling author of hundreds of comics and nearly 24 novels. He is also the writer for the hit film The Old Guard, starring Charlize Theron. I'm loving these conversations and hope you are too. If you are, please rate my podcast on your platform of choice and share it with others. If you'd like to help keep this podcast going, you can do so with a donation and support me and become a patron of the show by visiting my website or patreon.com/sifumimichan. For comments or suggestions, email me at mimi@culturechatpodcast.com or reach out on social media at sifumimichan. Now, on with the show. Hello, Greg.
How you doing, Mimi?
Well, I'm doing okay, and I'm worried about you. Obviously, there's such whole mess of things going on, but first of all, the fires and everything in Portland, are you and your family safe? Is everything okay with that?
Yeah, I mean, we're fortunate in that we live pretty deep in the city. We're not on the outskirts. So should things go really horribly wrong and these fires actually start to really consume the city from the direction they're approaching in, there are two freeways and a whole lot of concrete that they'd have to jump before we are imperiled. That said, this is horrible. I mean, over 500,000 people have been displaced. There was a piece I saw somebody noting that, we had protests, BLM protests downtown, basically centered around a building. And that was national news constantly. The fact that the state is on fire and that I believe something like 13% of the state's population has had to evacuate their homes. Wow. That's not national news. Wow. And the federal government sent troops because of that one block, but they ain't done dick. They're not, the president's not taking our senators' phone calls saying, we need an emergency declaration, we need help. So it's the air quality is wretched. This morning there was a dense fog because there's so much particulate smoke in the air for so long that you get the equivalent of that Victorian London pea soup fog, right? Because that fog was the result. I learned this morning. That fog was the result of all sort of the coal smoke.
The coal, yeah. I learned that from The Crown.
Yes. So yeah, and yeah, it stinks. You can't really go out. You can't really exercise. It's very difficult to do anything in the city as a result. Nobody's out, nobody's doing
Mm-hmm.
anything right now.
Yeah.
So it's just, they set up some shelters nearby, and we brought, we sort of cleared out a whole bunch of drawers and was like, well, here's stuff we're not wearing anymore, and we're sending it over. But they're talking about rain maybe Tuesday.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
Um, so that would be helpful,
Mm-hmm.
and at least the winds have died down.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's on par for this year, in that the things that happen erupt. You can see them coming, and then they're on top of you very quickly, and it's like COVID. I think everybody, and I don't think everybody, I think a lot of people have now just adapted to that as the status quo. It's
Mm-hmm.
just the way it is. It
Yeah.
sucks, but it's the way it is. You wear a
Yeah.
mask, you don't see people, you don't really get to go out often. Um, the sad truth is that um, is that the flip side of our adaptability as human beings is that we can become very accepting of things that perhaps we should not be so eager or willing to accept. So
Yeah, I mean, we talk about it all the time, the world literally being on fire, but this is like
mhm.
this is
it's
just
lit- it is
it's a
literally on
little
fire.
bit it's a
Yeah.
little too much now. I mean, now it's like the entire West Coast and you think, "Oh my God, California and what they're going through
Yeah.
constantly and has not stopped." And through one thing is we have the climate change issue, but then there's idiocracy. Like I saw the reason the last fire started was for a gender reveal, and I'm just going,
Oh,
"What
and
next?" You know?
it looks like somebody started at least one of the big Oregon ones intentionally.
Mm,
And there's a whole new level of madness here, which is in our outlying communities. The law enforcement white supremacy nexus up here is pretty becoming more and more revealed.
yeah.
And we have, I mean, militias are setting up roadblocks because they think Antifa people are setting fires, and they're not. I mean, that's just it's a lie,
Mhm.
and it's a lie that's propagated and has spread, and they're out there with guns, quote unquote, defending their communities, and law enforcement's telling them, keep it up, you're doing a hell of a job.
Yeah, it's
um
disgusting.
it's we have, I mean, if you think about that, if you really just stop and think, it's like, yeah, we're off the map. I mean, this is, I was thinking about this yesterday, and again, I guess it goes to that sort of ability to adapt and accept, and things become complacency. But this is insane.
Mhm.
I mean, we are living in insanity, and yeah, so it is. It is amazing to think how fragile sort of the safety of of our society uh, turns out to have been.
Yeah. It
Um,
basically, obviously we both feel this way since 2015 leading into 2016 and how we just keep lowering our bar and
mhm.
keep high our bar for tolerance of the insane keeps going higher because it just keeps getting crazier and crazier and that becomes the new normal and well that's just this and that's I mean it's exhaustive but if you like you said you stop to think about it this really has to end and
Yeah,
it has to end now like
no, it's
I can't even wait
we're
till November. Like it needs to
well,
end now.
we're racing to a breaking point. I'm certain, and whichever way it breaks, it's going to break.
Hmm.
So, and we will see what we
Yeah.
see,
Yeah.
but it's terribly depressing,
Hmm.
um, and it is becoming more and more difficult to find reliable information.
Yeah. Yeah. And, obviously this kind of leads me to my next question for you. And is really the most important thing I've been wondering about, because I saw this horrifically ridiculous article from the New York Post.
Yeah.
And I was so concerned for you and your family and your son, Elliott, having been arrested, and just the slander, I would say, in my opinion. I know you, and I know
It's actually
your
libel.
family. Libel. Okay,
If
that's right,
it's
because it's
printed,
written, it's printed, it's
yes, it's
libel. Yes,
libel.
but it's
Yeah.
defamation, it's libel. Yeah. And uh it
So okay, so people who have no idea what we're talking about, the people who do know what we're talking about don't listen to this podcast. Um, my son was arrested by the NYPD over a week ago attending a BLM protest. He was charged with a felony. The New York Post ran a piece, the headline of which was something like Portland comic book artist's son arrested in rioting or whatnot.
Yeah, it was Black Lives Matter rampage in New York City.
Okay.
Yes.
So and then the Post is a Murdoch paper, and is, as any New Yorker will tell you, really great for picking up dog shit, and not much use after that. And it's a nasty piece that only quotes cops, and has a lot of insinuation and a lot of bad reportage. So, for instance, the piece strongly implies that my son one day got up in Portland and decided that what he really needed to do was go to Manhattan and break windows, as opposed to the fact that no, actually, he's going to college in New York and has been out there since July.
Right.
But so here's the thing, and I've actually been asked, why haven't you commented on it? I can't comment on it. It is an ongoing legal matter. Okay? So anything I say beyond the most banal is potentially inflammatory or problematic or whatnot. I know what he has told me happened, and I know my son. And I have suspicions as to why he was arrested. And I have suspicions as to why these charges were brought. And I have suspicions as to how this is all going to resolve. But I can't talk about it.
Of course.
What I can say is that the effect of that New York Post piece is that my son has now become ammunition in the Murdoch right-wing press's culture war. That he has been portrayed as and of all places, Bleeding Cool did a piece talking about the New York Post piece that I thought was actually very good.
I agree.
But the equation that the very modest fame I have in the very small pond that is comic books somehow translates to me being, some multi-millionaire liberal intelligentsia dilettante. Right? When anybody who knows anything about comics is like, look, that ain't how it works. I mean, that's just not what it is.
Right.
So, but my son is being portrayed as a class traitor, and and a race traitor, and okay, well, guess what? I guess he is. So
I was just really disgusted by it, because it was clearly lacking in fact, and everything was very much like insinuating. Like they would state, oh, this person was this happened, some people were doing this, but not, it didn't connect the dots. Like, oh, these
Yeah.
people rioted, these people were at a protest, but it didn't say these people at the protest rioted. Like it was very much, if you read it carefully and not just look at the headline and go, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, these, white elitist kids, how dare
Yeah.
they? What do they have to be upset about? Like, if you don't just jump on that and you actually read it, you realize, wow, how low have we come in journalism where they don't even try to get it
Oh,
right.
but they
It
weren't. I mean, the purpose,
purposefully, it's
yeah,
purposeful. Yeah.
the purpose of that piece was propaganda. It is a propaganda piece, and it is
Yeah.
done, and it's a propaganda piece that feeds into a propaganda machine because the Murdoch press has picked it up internationally.
Mm-hmm.
So the result of that is that, and again, anybody listening can, this is the result of that is the inevitable, which is, uh, all those nice, well-behaved people on the internet behaving really kindly. And yes, so there have been a lot of threats and stuff like that. But like I say, at some point, in a few months, maybe early next year, you and I will be able to talk about this at length.
Yeah. Yeah.
But until then, I can't. Or more to the point, I won't.
Mm-hmm.
I could, but I won't.
Yeah, no, and understood. My concern is more for you, your well-being, your
Yeah,
family's well-being.
I
This is
I appreciate that. We
such
are
an
doing
attack.
okay. We are being very careful.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I mean, you just said 10 minutes ago, there's people running around militia thinking that they are,
yeah,
the guy in Die Hard or RoboCop or whatever, and wanting to take the law into their own hand. I mean, it's like the Wild West. And I'm just
yeah,
just so disappointed. Like it's so disheartening to constantly be disappointed by fellow humans. And granted, we should be used to this by now, but I think if I didn't have the hope, I would just be a depressed, destroyed person. And so I
mhm,
continuously try, but then things like this continuously happen where there's just attack. And these are all college students, right? So they're all there trying to do out there learning, having an education. And yeah, and anybody who knows anything, would know he's out there for college, that somebody wouldn't go across the country to, even if
yeah. It's
not that he did it, because I don't believe that happened either, but it's like, who would get up and risk themselves during COVID to fly across the country to vandalize somewhere?
yeah.
Like, not even a that's not even a story that one would
No,
write. Like,
it
it's just
doesn't.
doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and it's so
But
infuriating.
that but that's what they're banking on
Yeah.
because it's interesting. I was thinking about this too. We these same people who so quickly decry fake news on any story they do not like
Yeah.
gobbled this one up.
Mhm.
So what fake news really is if you do not confirm my bias, I reject your facts. Or I don't need facts because I just need my bias confirmed. So yeah, I mean it's absurd, and it's grotesque, and we're dealing with it, and the truth will come out on this.
Mhm.
And I am looking forward to when it does.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I am very sorry that you and your family are going through this. It's just
I appreciate it.
completely disgusting. And I know that not just me, but all of your fans and so many people stand behind you and believe in you and support you in this. And even just your well-being of the fires, everything. Like, everybody, I think, like you said, who reads comics happens to know that, like, for example, the amount of money Batman makes or Black Panther is not what a comic book writer
Yes,
is
exactly.
making.
It's like we do not have the Wayne fortune,
Right. The
and
Avengers does not equal the Avengers comic
yeah,
what is it called? Infinity
exactly,
Gauntlet did not make anything near what.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah, I
not
think
that
people are
there are
confused.
very very few comic book creators who actually can claim seven-figure incomes.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, trust me, I ain't even close.
And
So
but you shouldn't even have to justify or explain that to anyone.
No.
you're a hardworking
Well,
person and it
and
shouldn't matter, right?
and
So,
well, and yeah, and even like remove me from the equation and just look at this objectively, right? The I mean, take all the names out of it, and the idea that white college kids should not be protesting
mhm.
um, against white supremacy and a culture that allows the murder of brown people and the exploitation of them with impunity, that they shouldn't care about this. Well, it is times like this over and over again that I return to the fact that every major societal change comes about as a result of students.
Mhm.
It starts with students.
Yeah.
It starts with quote unquote the young, and I'm not a young. I'm coming up on becoming an old, right? Um, so if the response to this protest is to say, "Oh my God, look at what they're doing, and they're horrible, and it's bad," and so on, all that does is reinforce the nature of what protest is. Protest is unacceptable by the establishment. That's why it's protest, right? There is no such thing. You're never going to have a protest that is quote unquote lawful or appropriate or accepted. It is a protest. You are trying to make noise. You are trying to disrupt the status quo. You are trying to call attention,
Mhm.
and never mind the fact that once again, the whole thrust of, this argument that the Post is putting forward is, oh, these are entitled kids. What they're doing is they're arguing once again, right, that the value of the plate glass windows of a Starbucks are greater than the value of a life,
Mhm.
and specifically of a Black person's life,
Yeah.
and more broadly, of lives of the BIPOC community,
Mhm.
right? Um, that's the ultimate argument, right? Because that's the argument that gets you back to all lives matter, right? Okay, except not all lives are being hunted.
Exactly.
Um, but it is a false equivalency to say, people who break the windows of Banks of America, for instance, and I am just pulling that randomly out of my ass, are somehow, that is somehow worse than cops who are murdering, you know, uh, uh, Black women while they sleep in their homes. And the inability to the disconnect there
Mhm. Yeah.
is remarkable, and is all the and again, you see how you get it, because you see that it's being very actively fomented here, right?
Mhm.
Let's change the issue, let's change what we're talking about, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, so look, we've spent a lot of time on this, and like I said, at some point in the future, one way or another, you and I will have a conversation about it.
Whenever you are ready, sir, and
Yeah,
and able to. So
yeah,
yeah, it's just like I said, it's just such a disappointment one after another. And it's hard for me to, like, Oscar and I have these conversations. We're like, of course, we agree on protesting, and we understand, like what you just said. There's this disconnect where people don't understand. Well, why do you have to graffiti the building or light fires or whatever? And obviously, you're 100% right. That is so minuscule, like insignificant compared to a mother saying, "Well, my son just wanted to go buy a candy bar down the street and he got
yeah,
shot. He didn't even have
and
a
he got
weapon," right? But at the same time, Oscar and I's big concern is the fragility, which is what you just mentioned, of this country and the people in this country, that now they've forgotten about
yeah,
that incident, and all they see are rioters, and, oh, now we're afraid our country's going to be this, crazy apocalyptic, like, dystopian place where everyone's just rioting. Like you walk, you see those movies and everybody's just like crazy all the time and it's chaos. And it's amazing how quickly they take to that and quickly they forget the empathy they had, right? Because I've heard people that I've had conversations with about trying to talk to their very conservative friends. Well, no, I was aboard the Black Lives Matter until the riots started,
Yeah.
and it's like, so on one
I was
hand,
fine with it. I was fine with it until they broke somebody's, window. And
right.
it's like, okay, all right.
Yeah, it's just like, how
That's
can we
where
get this?
that's where you're jumping off. Okay.
Yeah, and so it's frustrating, and then so that's why Oscar and I are like, yes, of course we understand it, and it's just like we kind of are always going, no, don't do the rioting, no, don't do this, because we just don't have the faith in our fellow humans in America now to be able to look at that and go, well, look,
No,
this is what needs to change
and the
because this is
narrative,
happening.
right? And that's the thing, right? Because that's the counter narrative that's being pushed. The counter narrative being pushed is they're not actually protesting; they're just a bunch of violent anarchists. And yeah.
Do you think then that that's like the people who have said, oh, I empathize, I agree, the George Floyd murder was horrible, and then as soon as the rioting starts, they jump ship? Do you think that's what they want to see? Is they want to see that that's the anarchist, and then justify the
Yeah.
these people, quote unquote, are the ones that are causing? Do you think it's them trying to make themselves feel better about?
Yeah, I do think
they
to a great extent, it's like at a certain point, I can justify jumping off this.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't think it's necessarily malicious. I think these things are complicated.
Yeah.
Because I have mixed feelings about it, right? I'm not sure. I am not sure what the most effective means of protest are.
Yeah.
Because until, we're living right now where any protest, literally people who were going out and doing nothing but chanting, right? Nothing but chanting, night after night after night, tear gassed night after night after night. We're scooped up off the street, and thrown in the back of unmarked vans and held without legal recourse, and unconstitutionally searched. And there's no accountability there. And again, I come back to the point where what protest is acceptable. Because if it's acceptable protest, it isn't protest. Right? If you're comfortable with it, then, especially if you are part of the institution being protested against, if you're comfortable with the way they're bringing the objection, it's not an effective protest.
Correct.
Because if you're comfortable with it, then you don't need to change.
Right.
No, I mean, right.
You agree with the protesters.
Exactly. Well, and it's like, that's fine. You guys keep it up.
Yeah.
I'm with you. Right. Protest is meant to inconvenience and to force the change. Right. You lie down, on the freeway to stop the traffic. Right. You don't lie down on the freeway so that people are like, oh, look, that was a nice gesture. Right. This isn't about the gesture.
Yeah.
And at this point, over 100 days in, there has been no change. There was a piece published by the ACLU earlier this week saying, I mean, just since the start of the year, cops have killed almost 5,400 people. 5,400 people. That's insane. I mean, that's insane. Really? 5,400 people?
And it's insane how accepted that is. Well, that's collateral debt, or that's what happens, that's the industry, or that's the profession, and it's terrible how accepted it is, and that's why there's protest. And it's interesting to me as well, because so many people like to say protest is so anti-American. I'm going, our country was literally founded on
Who says
protest. Like,
that? I mean, really, protest is anti-American? The very nature of the country is built on
yeah, I'm
that.
like, do you remember the Boston Tea Party?
Yeah, excuse me,
And
what do you
like,
think that
what
was? That was
but that, I mean, to me, that's destruction of property. That's all those things that
it
the
is.
fondly think of now as our forefathers fighting for what was right. And yet when someone spray paints a building, or, locks down a street because they're blocking the street, like, this is totally unacceptable.
Yeah.
It's, and yeah. So it's amazing to me how we as humans, I mean, I do it as well in different circumstances, can pick and choose what we want to say, well, this is acceptable, or this is
Yeah.
okay,
We
what we
are
want to justify.
we are all we are all guilty of our own confirmation biases.
Mm-hmm.
And and it's incumbent upon us to interrogate, you know, why we think what we think,
Mm-hmm.
why we believe what we believe, and that's not easy. And again, it's not comfortable. It's not a thing folks like to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I get it. I mean, I really do get it. But yeah, it's so and here's the other thing. We are now in September, and there is no way this is going to let up. It's just going to get worse and worse, and
Mm-hmm.
more and more, and louder, and it's going to continue all the way through the election, especially as, for instance, more and more of the Woodward tapes come out. Then the only possible response from, the trumpeters is to shriek louder and louder and point at anything else.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, literally anything else.
Yeah.
I I don't know. I just don't know anymore. I think that we have yeah. I said it, as I said at the top. We literally are in madness. Like, logic and reason and common sense and certainly common decency, all these things seem to have left the building.
Mm-hmm.
And it is scary. And one of the things that I think you're going to see a push towards is, okay, so how do we get that back to a place where it isn't this? What's the normal, right? And the way that the election is going to frame that choice is the trumpeters screaming law and order, which is screaming fascism, right? We will execute the people. Literally, we will shoot them.
Mm-hmm.
We have proven that we will do it. We have done it. And we will continue to do it. Or the Biden-Harris ticket saying, hey, wouldn't you like people who actually had some common sense and decency? And, as in all things, my concern is always that fear is the easiest way to control people. Easiest way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have to think about what it is we're really afraid of.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I know what I'm afraid of in November.
Look, so do I.
What's interesting is you constantly in your writings and many conversations that we've had, we always talk about the bottom line is how this works for people in terms of how money drives everything. And I've had a few people this week reach out to me and go, you know, Greg Rucka's right in that interview you had with him, how he says money drives everything and that companies won't take a social stand if it means their bottom line is affected. And so people, of course, were talking about the one we just talked about with Mulan and how, well, when it comes down to the dollar and Disney doesn't want to piss off China because they feel, well, they need that market. And it's interesting how the last week or so many people have texted me, hey, you know, Greg Rucka's right. So if there's a way to make that greed work for the good of the country, how can we channel that? Because that's inevitable. Like if people care so much about their money and their bottom line, like how can then we use that?
Well, what we need to do is we need to create an environment where it is more expensive for you to not do the right thing.
There you go. See, I knew you'd come up with something.
I mean, that's it. It's got it. Like, this is how you solve the lack of a fairness doctrine act, is that you impose rules on public platforms like Facebook and Twitter and Google and in the media that say, you know, and again, it's not going to be easy to do, right? But it's going to say you cannot present as factual a lie. You can't do it. It is illegal. And if you do it, the fine is so punitive that, for instance, on Google or say on Facebook, for every minute that this piece of propaganda remains up, you are charged $250 million fine. Oh, you'll watch Facebook fix that real quick, right? And yeah, it's got to be a ridiculously punitive fine. You have to make it hurt so much so that Sinclair Broadcasting wouldn't dare do it. Just wouldn't dare.
Yeah.
And then people will say, well, that's freedom of speech, freedom of expression. It's like, no, that's not what that is. That's not what we're saying. We're not saying you don't have a right to say it. We're saying you cannot present it as true. If it's an opinion, it's got to be presented as opinion.
Yeah, it should be a huge opinion column, like
exactly.
any newspapers had opinion.
Like it used to be before Reagan got rid of the fairness doctrine.
Yeah.
So there are, you know, look, there are solutions. There are ways out of this, but it's not quick. Because one of the other things that we desperately need is education, and education has been undermined. You know, you only get where we are because a huge investment was made in making people ignorant and keeping them to take away their ability to think critically about things. So.
Yeah, earlier you mentioned, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go on.
I was just saying earlier you'd mentioned that, you know, college students are the ones that will actually eventually make the changes. Like we're looking at the youth and what they bring to the table and they lead. And it's so true. I was just recalled, I believe it was a podcast. I mean, I'd have to look it up so I don't quote it wrong, but one of the sons of the KKK organization, or a really strong white supremacist organization, was the one who started the biggest radio network in the country as a teen, and was like all in, and went off to college, and over like a year span had his eyes so opened by fellow classmates and peers that brought him in, had dinner, like opened his eyes to there are other things in the world, you know, long story short. And he basically left that whole thing, and him and his dad had this like crazy dissonance, but they just had to accept like they've gone. But he was such an advocate for that white supremacy. He led, you know, he led the radio broadcast and all these things. And then it just took like a year of college for his eyes to be opened and for him to have that education. And so you're right. It's education has been downplayed and given a bad image, and the college students, even when they try to fight for something, they are put down. And I think that we are definitely, you know, in danger of missing something there if we don't support that. And even just the education for the younger kids. I was just talking to a parent the other day as a teacher. I'm like, yeah, well, I have to teach kids communication and responsibility, and learning that they need to pivot and change because things don't go as planned. Because in school, unfortunately, teachers just get to teach kids how to take standardized tests. And I was like, so
Yeah.
when I get a kid and I ask them a question and they get so scared because they're going to get the wrong answer, or they get so scared, it's frustrating as an educator to be like, wow, these are things that should be learning in school, and all
Yeah.
they get to do is learn to take tests and memorize an answer and spit it out and hope that it's right. Otherwise, they
And
feel bad about themselves.
exactly, yeah. Like your self-worth is now wrapped up in your ability to perform. Not it has nothing to do with your intellectual curiosity or capability or drive.
No.
It has to do with your ability to learn by rote.
Hmm.
Um,
You wonder why kids hate school. I mean,
yeah,
it's horrible.
yeah.
But yeah, it just I do appreciate you taking the time this weekend to talk to me, because I know that things are on fire and crazy for you right
Literally,
now,
yes.
literally, but also just everything you're going through with your family. It's just unbelievable. And again, I always appreciate these conversations in whatever way I can get them. And I know our listeners do as well. We've always getting good responses, and people just saying how much they enjoy hearing what you have to share, because you do really, you're like kind of like a writer or something. Like, you put words together so well. It's almost like you're a writer, like you
I
know how to
am. I
formulate
am.
sentences.
I am almost like a writer. You are.
but,
You are correct. I am
but
almost like a writer.
And I don't just say this to you because we're friends and all, but like literally Oscar and I today, because we are on our Atticus Kodiak. I'm done with Patriot Acts now. See, I told you. And so I'm like, I
Okay.
told him I've got to see like my other friends that we're doing a book club with this. And literally I'm like, well, just read Critical Space, and then at least you'll have that. And they're like, what? I can't just stop there. I got to keep going. And now they want to go all the way through Walking Dead. So I'm trying to give them some time. But I was like, well, maybe if they read Walking Dead, they could just tell me, just like Cersei, like which chapters to skip or how I can, because I feel like I want to keep reading. But
I wish there was a way to
I
take
know, I know. Well,
through it that's
I
safe.
no, it's all good. But in honesty, Oscar and I were like, the thing about Greg is that, we know a lot of writers that do that genre of the Kodiak style, or, Lee Hain and everything. And but the thing about Greg is like he excels at prose, comics, and now proven as a screenwriter. I was like, that's pretty remarkable, because it's very hard to, I think, span all different mediums. And so you should feel really good about yourself.
Oh, thank you.
Really, really. And Oscar's like, yeah, and they're all like really good stuff. It's not like, oh, his comics are, a little on the
And
weekend.
yeah, they're not everything we had hoped. That's good
Speaking
to
of
hear.
which, though, I know that is it Black Magic is I know it already came out, but like we've got Lazarus coming up, we've got Greg Rucka comic stuff for us to be
Yeah,
distracted by.
starting to roll again. Well, Black Magic is still coming out. I think there's another issue coming in the next week or two.
Right, that's what I thought.
Because we're
So
just putting 15 to bed this coming
okay.
week. And then Lazarus Risen 5 it got delayed for multiple reasons. It will be out the 28th of October. So that is coming. But as we get closer to that, we'll talk. And yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So for our listeners, please continue to read your Kodiak stuff. Send in your
Oh,
questions
yes.
before October 1st. I'm going to give them a deadline
All
now.
right, that's
before
gonna be our
October
date?
1st. That's the
All right.
deadline. People need to send in all their questions by then and start reading like
Then we
crazy.
can talk. We
Then
can,
talk.
we'll talk Kodiak then.
You'll talk
Okay.
Kodiak, which will be a nice kind of break from all the crazy and stuff. But as always, I super appreciate you and our conversations, and my very best and thoughts with Jen and Dashiell and Elliott and you and everybody in Portland, of course, too.
Thank
But
you
yeah,
so
really
much.
thinking about you guys a lot. So
Really appreciate it. It's good to talk to you, Mimi. And I
all
hope
right.
you and Oscar and your whole family's staying safe and doing well. And again, like we talk about, I'm just going to say, big advocate for self-care, guys. Stay, everybody out there, take the time to, love yourself and the people around you. And I know how hokey that sounds, but just take a little time and grant yourself the grace. It is hard right now. And we do live in a society that teaches us. And I encountered this and I know we're wrapping up, so I'll make it quick.
Oh,
but
no, it's fine. I have time.
I encountered this sharply when my dad passed away, which is, you know, we live in particular, I think, in the US, but arguably in the West, you know, first world societies that expect us to sort of get over things in a certain amount of time, right? Well, that was a week ago. You should be over it by now. And it don't work like that.
No.
And you are not obligated to do that. And, you know, and taking care of ourselves is an ongoing process, and one that we are oftentimes made to feel guilty for engaging in. Do not feel guilty for wanting to take care of yourself.
Yes. Agreed. Very well said. And let others take care of you as well when
Exactly.
offered.
Because
that is self-care.
Exactly. If you can take care of yourself, then you can take care of others.
Yeah. Very, very true. Very true. Well, until next time, the Greg and Mimi Show.
Yeah. Talk to you on Thursday.
All right. That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to Culture Chat, and hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please subscribe and rate my podcast. Feel free to leave me suggestions or send an email to mimi@culturechatpodcast.com, or follow me on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook.